you could take both and pretend like they knew that Darlene was coming.
Darlene, we no meet none of that. We very set. Test, test.
Good evening. Can everybody hear me okay? No, you can't hear me? You can hear me. Okay, awesome. I think we're going to get started. Thank you so much for coming and welcome. Whether you're here today in person or virtually, we're so pleased that you chose to come tonight. Tonight's discussion is sponsored by the Racial Justice Committee here at KUC, of which I am a member. Our mission is to promote racial justice by creating opportunities to listen, learn, and discuss, as well as to advocate for racial equity. We believe as a faith community, we have the power to make a positive impact. Before we get started, I wanted to briefly mention just a few announcements on behalf of the RJC. First of all, we'd like to invite all of you to sign up for our summer book discussion focusing on the recently released Matthew Desmond book titled Poverty by America. It will be available for purchase at the bookstall table over here on the left, vis-a-vis your QR code. We also want to draw attention to our newsletter, which will keep you updated on Racial Justice Committee activities. You can also sign up for that at the front desk over here where you entered when you came in. After the presentation, we will field about 30 minutes of questions from the audience. You will be provided a mic and asking your question, as it's the only way for those live streaming to actually hear your inquiries. So we'll have people roaming the room with mics, just so you're not taken aback by that when you're ready to ask a question. We'd like to thank the Bookstall and Jacob for helping us promote this event tonight and for being here so that you might, if you'd like to purchase a copy of High Risers, and also, as I mentioned before, vis-a-vis QR code, you can purchase Poverty by America. Tonight's discussion is the result of our continuing work to understand the Black experience in the United States. Last fall, the Racial Justice Committee sponsored a civil rights history trip down to Alabama, and we continue to learn and share what we've learned from that experience. We are pleased tonight to have with us award-winning journalist Ben Austen, author of High Risers, Cabrini-Green, and the Fate of American Public Housing, along with special guest Johnnie Veal, who is mentioned in Ben's book. In High Risers, Ben walks us through the rise and fall of one of America's most iconic public housing projects. It braids personal narratives, city politics, and national history to tell the timely and epic story of Chicago's Cabrini-Green housing project. High Risers was shortlisted for the Andrew Carnegie Medal of Excellence in Nonfiction and named one of the best books of 2018 by Booklist, Mother Jones, and the public libraries of Chicago and St. Louis. A former editor at Harper's Magazine, Ben has written for numerous publications, including the New York Times Magazine, GQ, Wired, and The Atlantic. Currently, Ben co-hosts a podcast called Some of My Best Friends Are. He does so with childhood friend and Harvard professor Khalil G. Muhammad. With episodic guests, the two discuss growing up on the south side of Chicago in a deeply divided country and what it looks like to navigate that divide today. I highly recommend it. It's entertaining, and you learn a lot about this great city of Chicago. Ben is a native of Hyde Park and also teaches in the creative writing program at the University of Chicago. I personally met Ben in Nashville at my brother's 40th birthday party in 2015. He raved about Ben's upcoming book about Cabrini-Green, which he later noted took 7 years to research. Shortly after High Risers' release, I invited Ben to speak at my book club. Some of you are here tonight and can attest to his humble demeanor, institutional knowledge, investigative talent, and the thoughtful perspective that accompanies his storytelling. Johnnie Veal, who's also with us tonight, grew up in Cabrini-Green. Incarcerated at the age of 17, Johnnie served 51 years in prison before his release on parole in 2021. He is now a motivational speaker for youth and a community activist. We are profoundly grateful for his willingness to share his experience. On November 7th, Ben will release his second book, Correction: Parole, Prison, and the Possibility of Change. Our hope is to host a follow-up event once it hits the stands. Ben feels that this is the most crucial topic to be discussed in today's climate of racial inequity. Surely there will be much more to discuss after tonight's program, so we hope that you'll be able to join us for a recurring event. I'm humbled and pleased to have Ben and Johnnie with us tonight to discuss Cabrini-Green, mass incarceration, the American prison system, and the possibility and promise of change. With that, a very warm welcome to both of you.
How are our mics? Can everyone hear? Yeah? Right.
Same here. Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Yeah. Okay.
Thank you for that
Yeah.
generous introduction.
Okay.
Thank you so much for inviting us out and to be in this beautiful church and to be in this community. One of my high school math teachers, Steve Victoria, is here. What a surprise. Uh-oh. And you know, Darlene, I'm so glad you're here, and most of all, for us to be together.
Yeah.
That's a really powerful and meaningful thing.
Yes. It's like a revolving door where positive and the negative at one time.
The first thing I want to say, you go ahead, finish what you're going to say.
Yeah, in retrospect, we get a chance to go through that revolving door from a different perspective now, whereas I'm not incarcerated where you're free, you get a chance to evolve.
Yeah.
And we have evolved greatly.
Yeah. So the first thing I want to say is you were introduced as Johnnie Veal. And when I first heard of you, that's how I also knew your name, because I knew it from newspaper stories and then other reports. But you go by Khalif.
Yes.
And can you tell about that name? I know that in Arabic it means leader or one who leads.
Yeah. Grew up in a community where I was roughly mixes a variety of cultures, identity, and etc. But I'm a Catholic school boy. Grew up in a Catholic church. Loved St. Joseph Parish. Graduated from St. Joseph. Went to all boys school, Holy Trinity. And I had an enormous life, but unfortunately, I took this pitfall in life where all opportunity was lost and entered the Department of Corrections. But even in the Department of Corrections, it doesn't stop you from growing. It doesn't stop you from losing your identity. You grow from a kid to a young adult, from a young adult to a man. In each growth period, you identify yourself with that growth. A lot of times, moms may name you Susan, but when you go to school and hang out with your friends, it's Susie. Hey, S, how you doing, S? Hi, girl. And you identify with that community and the people that you socialize with. They give you that name, or you come through a persona where something you have done, something you have cultivated in your life that tags you with that name. And in my case, I was tagged with the name Khalif, not knowing at the time what I was doing and how I was doing it. But I had took the position of always leading the charge for prison reform, community action, always stepping forward to take that initiative step. And some older gentleman say, hey, that little young kid, this is you. And I had to read up on it. If anybody ever studied Khalil Gibran, he's a writer, great poet. I studied him. I had to look him up. And I started seeing some of the things that they saw in me as far as leadership and et cetera. Because when I read The Prince by Khalil Gibran had really set the stage. The Prophet. Yeah. And it's opened my eyes to a lot of things. This little Catholic school kid doesn't have a clue about the world, didn't have an inclination about what adulthood was. But someone saw in me my ability to organize, to cultivate, and to set voices in motion for action. Anyone can say, let's do this, but you take the action to make the sacrifice to step forward to do it. That commitment is what set me apart from others that distinguish the name of Khalif. Because I always took time to lead, to cultivate, and to show. And I embraced it well in my upcoming. Now that I'm a seasoned adult in my wonder years, I am proud to say I wear 70 well. You know, I'm not the 17-year-old kid anymore. I'm a 70-year-old man, have been robbed of life, but yet still I stay focused. And that's why I say I have took the time to grow from this to this to this to this in each level of life. Each year bring about change. Each decade bring about focus, determination, and commitment to things that you believe in. And I have taken that charge to lead as far as community change, prison reform, social issues. And all this is based on my faith. I hold faith dearly because I come from a Catholic family. I come from a church where we put God first. I come from a heck of a story and a journey, one foot in front of the other, as far as not losing my faith when others had gave up on me. And that's how I hold my name, Khalif.
Thank you. Yeah. Khalif. So, I mean, I first knew you as Johnnie Veal, and now, you know, we've worked together in a way for 5 years almost. Yeah. And so, of course, when we've become friends, and so you said to me, call me Khalif. Yeah. I want to talk about how we met. So when High Risers came out in 2018, I wrote about you in the book without knowing you.
I didn't have a clue who you were.
and when the book came out, a friend of yours named Ted Pearson, he reached out to me, and he runs an organization called the Chicago Alliance Against Racist and Political Repression. And he sent me an email, and he said, hey, will you look into the story of Johnnie Veal? It's a case that we're representing. One, he's innocent, and two, he's coming up for parole. And I'll be really honest with you. So I knew about you because in 1970 you were sent to prison at the age of 17. And when Ted reached out to me, here I am, a journalist, and I wrote this entire book, and I feel like I'm a pretty decent journalist, like I try to be very thorough. And I had not reached out to you for an interview. I wrote about your case because it was a really big deal in Chicago at the time and a really transformative event for Cabrini-Green. It really changed. It was one of these heater cases that the entire city is focused on. And I had to think about, first of all, like, why didn't I reach out to you? I couldn't really imagine a 17-year-old boy from 1970 still sitting in a cell 48 years later. Like, it didn't even cross my mind. And I had to investigate that about myself and also about our society, because so much of our thinking about the criminal justice system is about not thinking about people there. It's about, we talk about being tossed out of society, about being sent away, about life. Prisons are far away from city centers. It's hard to communicate. It's hard to visit. And so all of those things contributed to that. And then the other thing Ted said, he said that you're coming up for parole. And I was like, parole? What do I know about parole? So I started going to parole hearings, but I also came and visited you at prison. And I bring all that up to ask you, because I know you now. If Ted's reaching out to me, you're kind of behind it too. And what was it that you thought you needed at that point? What did you think I might help you with?
I can only do so much with typewriters at the time. Laptops was not existing in institutions, but I can only do so much with a typewriter.
You literally had a typewriter, a brother typewriter.
Brother typewriter.
Just to let you know. So, yeah.
There's only so much you can do with a typewriter. I had to take the time to learn how to tell a story. I did not know how to formally mold or put a writing in perspective where someone could say, "Ooh, let me pay attention." I had to take time to understand what I was fighting for, how I was fighting, how do I get my point across. Everyone I used to reach out for, the Innocent Project, other prominent attorneys, okay, this doesn't catch my eye, or this doesn't, ring a bell, I don't feel like I can deal with this story. I had to learn how to present myself to the community. I did not know how to say, look at me, this is this kid from a 1970 in a pre-futuristic situation trying to tell a story. I had to reach into my heart and say, okay, not knowing you, I just figured out what writers, what investigators, what judges, what ministries can lend an ear and say, let me push you over the hill. I was fortunate enough to have a great mentor, which is Ted Pearson, great guy in the community, deal with social issues. He cultivated my mental state, he cultivated my concept, he cultivated my ideologies for community service, to volunteers, how to do of service to the community. With that, I had an opportunity to say, wow, now I can write a letter. Hey, Mr. Austen, my name is, and I would say I have been through the courts, I have been through different legal organizations, and everyone was like, we can't help you, or we can't do this. I needed someone to turn over the rock, look up under the rock, and say, there's one variable that you overlook. Here's another variable that should have been noticed. And you take those pieces and it form a picture where this guy is actually innocent. Why did you miss it? What was the problem in 1970 as compared to 218, 217, something like that? Yeah. What was the difference? Closed eyes, politics of an era, cultural events of an era. 1970 was a changing point for a lot of us as far as politics, community, change, growth, financial situations. We have tittered on the age of progress with technology. We have tittered on the age of concepts and ideologies, dreams, and most of all, how faith was being challenged on all levels. I had no idea what pro-choice was, right to life, any of that, until I had to study. I did not know about the Supreme Court or what the court does until I studied. These are the things that I needed from him as far as the case, because he had a talent, an innate ability to say, my investigative skills tell me I should go north and not south to find out the facts that I need. And Lord behold, some of the stuff that I was trying to get into the courts and to bring forth at that time, he had already discovered it doing his writings in investigative positions. So I piggyback off that and say, you have done the work that I couldn't do. Please help.
Yeah, yeah. And we met in the prison, and I essentially said to you, listen, I'll look into the case, and I'm a journalist, so whatever I find, I'm going to report. If I find that it says this is a bad case for you, and it looks like, you know, the things are pointing that you're guilty, I'm going to have to report that. And you were like, great. I mean, I know how this is going to play out.
Yeah.
And I'd say the other thing is, and I know this is a little unfair to say, but it's about my motivations. To me, the question of guilt or innocence wasn't as important as some other things. Meaning 17, 50 years. Those two things. I don't care what you did in a way. Meaning you were 17 and 50 years. What kind of society, like what do we expect was supposed to happen in those 48, 50 years? And so I was interested also in that question and how a parole board could talk about that, could talk about what was supposed to happen in all that time and get into rehabilitation. So we start talking on the phone. I mean, so, you know, sometimes 3 times a day, sometimes once a day, sometimes once a week, sometimes once every 2 weeks. And I started, you opened yourself up to me, your whole life story. And you know me, I asked every question, and if I didn't understand it, I asked the same question 25 times. But one of the things I want to talk about here for this audience is a little bit about where you grew up, and Cabrini-Green, which is a public housing complex on the near north side of Chicago, about 10 blocks west of the Gold Coast and the Magnificent Mile, just south of Lincoln Park, so in a kind of posh neighborhood. It's really unique for Chicago and hyper-segregated Chicago. It's one of like the only large black settlements that's not on the west side or the south side. And so you move in there as a kid. And can you talk about that? Like why your mom moved there and what it was like when you arrived?
I think we stayed on 418 Polina out west in Chicago. My mom, she was part of that generation that migrated from the South. She migrated from Jackson, Mississippi during that period, and she landed out west. Opportunity at that time that says, that old saying, go north, young man, go north. In the movie, they say go west to California. But the point was opportunity, better lifestyle, better conditions, better employment, et cetera, was on the north side of Chicago. So well, I was too young to grasp the thought, but we as a family had moved into the projects, looking for a better situation, better housing, et cetera, because, you know, a lot of the housing was built for returning military personnel that was coming back from the war because of the slumlords and wasn't no place for them to live and et cetera. So they started building these complexes on these acres, and housing was available for them initially. Then all of a sudden it became for the less fortunate, a certain economical section of our society start moving to the projects, so which is a great benefit of uplift. I had a chance to see it when it was magnificent. You couldn't walk on the grass. The little crab apples on the tree. Don't pick the apples and blah, blah, blah. But opportunity was there. It was rich. It was rich in opportunity, rich in value. The concept of the Andy or Mayberry type neighborhood that you can go outside. We didn't even lock our door. We just sat out and just chill and enjoy the weather and et cetera. No gunshots, no violence, none of that. And keep in mind that it straws on what, like 10 acres of land or 20 acres, something like that?
70 total acres.
It's 70 total
So
acres?
You know, probably as many people as are in
Yeah,
Kenilworth.
30,000.
What's the population
Yeah.
of Kenilworth?
Yeah.
2,500.
How many?
I think it's about 2,500.
Yeah, so there were
no,
about about 15,000 people
More.
on about 10 square blocks, and that was on lease, so there might have been 20,000 people, some estimates, on just like 70 acres of land, 20,000 people.
Yeah. But, like I said, any community, if there's no jobs, if there's no opportunity to elevate, to excel, or to move forward, it deteriorates. If there's nothing for the kids and the youth to do or to get involved in or participate in any activity, your mind goes, okay, what am I going to do? I can't play in the playground, I can't shoot ball, I can't compete in the programs. And you get into vices. And as a period of time, the neighborhood that was quiet and tranquility, it was beautiful, started deteriorating each year. And then all of a sudden it became to the point where it was unlivable. You have shootings and I'm talking about reckless violent activity daily, on a constant daily battle. You know, even in it's like what you see in today's neighborhoods on the news, we may turn it on the news, you see a perspective of life where it's violence, youth this, youth that, youth that. It's a different time and era in 1970. 1970, it was just beginning. So it wasn't, I would say, uncompassionate as it is now. In 1970, you may say, why wait out to school and I'm gonna fight you, or I do this, I'm gonna do this, and blah, blah, blah. Today's kids, they go right into school and shoot everybody in the classroom, you know, and who would ever phantom that? We, in our wildest dreams, had never even conceived that thought, not even been on that page. What possesses a child to have that much anger or that much fear that he would come and do something like that and act out? In our day and time, you know, you throw up your dukes, or you pick up a little pipe or something, or you may have a little pistol here that you shoot, blah, 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 but not on the level that you see today. And you look at these kids now from 1970 that have grew up and understand that, man, I'm so glad I grew out of that neighborhood. I'm so glad I grew out of that mentality. I'm so glad I lived to be 40 or 50. Because in our time and era, they said, you'll never live to be 18 or 21. You would never live it. And we didn't have a concept or clue because we had no fear. We had no idea what society offered. All we was the safety of moms and dad. I was cool at home. I was cool in my neighborhood. That violence changed in a drop of a hat. From 1970 to 60s all the way up to the 80s, it went rampant. And it's like opportunity. What project a community was on a scale of upward mobility for its generation, its community, its youth, and opportunity to non-existence at all.
Yeah, yeah.
You know?
I just want to say, recognizing Darlene here, who is your wife, also grew up at Cabrini-Green, and you guys were in neighboring high-rises and were sweethearts. You would go roller skating together, you dated, and you recently, I mean, you got back together about a decade ago, and now you're married since you got out. So it's a beautiful love story, and it's about, you know, life is really long until it's short. You know, you're talking about all the things that change, and I'll just like talk about, you know, some of the structural stuff that changed. Cabrini-Green existed there as a public housing development because it was an industrial area, and because you know, it was an Irish neighborhood for immigrants, and at the sort of the turn of the 20th century, and then an Italian neighborhood, and then largely a black neighborhood, and you couldn't throw a rock and not hit a factory in that area, and meaning that there were jobs, and they were you know, jobs that were limited in a lot of ways. They were industrial jobs, and so you're talking about sort of a kind of failure of opportunity. I mean, like everything that is made overseas now was made on the near north side of Chicago, like anything you could think of, from like candy bars to jukeboxes to shoes, everything. Everything. And that all disappears. I think there's one factory left over there. You know, and I ran into on Clybourne, and I ran into the owner one day when I was reporting and just walking the neighborhood. And he was just like the last one. He makes parts for trucks. and everything else has been turned into sort of condominiums or into some kind of other commercial. And I asked him if he ever hired people who were from Cabrini-Green, and at first he said, "Oh yeah, of course." And then he sort of stopped and he said, "No, just Spanish and Polish." Just go ahead.
Yeah. It's ironic when we talk about change. I watched this movie 1,000 times. I imagine some of y'all have. We watch television, we see Al Capone's St. Valentine's Day Massacre. Do you know we stayed 4 blocks? 4 blocks from the garage where the incident took place? And I didn't have a clue. In my time, they had changed the garage into a horse and buggy tour where you take your sweetheart or you go for a ride in the city on your horse and buggy. And that's all I knew it as until you sit down and you get a history of the speakeasy joints that was over there. Then Ron Rivera, he bust open the safe that was in Chicago. Yeah. I'm like, Al Capone's safe, that was a big thing on television. We found this magical safe and it's supposed to have been so much millions and et cetera. And all they had was a bottle of vodka. Bottle of vodka and something. But Chicago have a rich history. And you have to dig deep like Ben to find out all those little crevices and those cravats, and you will learn a great deal about where you live. And at that time, like I said, we was kids. I didn't know anything across Division, called a street called Division, where we go into Carl Sandburg's, big difference. Here in Cabrini-Green, zip code 6010, 610, property. Across Division, Carl Sandburg, Lincoln Park, 60612. Fabulous. Impeccable lawns, impeccable housing. Didn't know that downtown area and those neighboring spots dictate how your credit rating would be, how your job performance would be, how your opportunity would come when it comes to a loan, And you learn quick, fast, and in a hurry at that period of time. In the 70s, we had layaway. Don't have layaway today. But those are the structures at that time when we used to have comparisons about neighborhoods. And it is so blessed because in each one of the neighborhoods that you live, no matter what it was, the church held strong. The church is what kept a lot of us grounded in the community as well as in the prisons. Our faith was so strong in a lot of the Baptist church and Presbyterians, Catholics, at the mosque, at the synagogue. No matter where you went on those particular days, on those holy days, everybody had God in their family. And the only thing I ever remember was John F. Kennedy picture, Martin Luther King in our living room wall. Everybody in that period of time had those pictures in their living room. JFK was the best president in the world, as they say, but we had it. And those bases for Catholics, Presbyterians, it doesn't make them what faith you belong to. It held true to the community.
Was it a trinity? Was it JFK, MLK, and Jesus? Did you have those all?
Yeah, that was basically that was the calling card.
The other big change that I'll just want to bring up, because it's really about what we're talking about today, is that starting in the 1970s, the country's policies on prisons completely changed.
Yes.
And so in 1970, we have about 198,000 people in prison throughout the United States. And that number had actually remained steady for almost the entire 20th century up to then, which is incredible when you think about, with legal segregation, with all the changes, pretty much from the end of slavery to then, the rate of imprisonment in the United States had pretty much remained steady. Starting in 1973, we increased exponentially every single year until about 2009, and are still way up there. So in 2009, we go from 197,000, about 200,000, to 1.6 million. It is unprecedented, not just globally, but also here nationally. There is nothing in the country that there is any precedent for this. We now incarcerate 1 in 4 of the world's incarcerated people. We, the United States. And these policies change. You know, you're unfortunate, like a teenager, just as this is going on, but we have a war on poverty, you know, that we're investing in social services and social safety net programs. And it switches right around then to a war on crime and a war on drugs. And we put our collective resources into crime fighting and into imprisonment. And really what we do as a country is we lock up people. We're more certainly going to lock up people and for much more longer periods of time.
That was that period of mass incarceration, you know, because when President Clinton signed off on that crime bill, it
94, yeah.
well, it was a floodgate, whereas youth and young adults and anybody just inclination of just being suspected of a crime, you was thrown away and locked away, and the key was thrown over the shoulder. And you didn't really understand what was going on because you was caught up in a political battle.
Yeah, you're just a kid, right?
You're just a kid. And a lot of people like, war on drugs ain't got to do with me. Oh, yes, it does. You know, war on this. Oh, yes. Everything that deals with politics and political fallout and feedback, because you have that position to make that law or make policy change. If your policy is not with the people or with the consensus of the majority, it goes against the grain of being effective or being popular. Because when we sit up here and say youth, 17 and under, 20 and under, your mind is not fully developed to be responsible as an adult. Do that mean that you lock them up for life and throw away the key? Or do you give him rehabilitation programs or opportunity to see where he's at, and you work for that? And we talked about rehabilitation as opposed to punishment.
Yeah, yeah. You talked about that a lot.
Yes.
When you went into prison at 18, which is when you entered, what was it like? Can you describe, like, entering? What was your first day like?
Wow, my first day was off the chain, so to speak. Being a minor or young adult, going into an adult prison was a shocker. You had to adjust quick, fast, and in a hurry, because it's all about survival. It's all about grasping your situation. Unfortunately, as soon as I walk into a cell house, on the 10th gallery, they are fighting on the 10th gallery, 2 guys. Staff try to break it up and et cetera, and then they try to throw the officer over the gallery. That was my first vision of an adult prison. Coming through the door with my little belongings, my little cap. And I saw then what was the possibility of surviving 100 to 199 years. How do you survive that in a violent environment that you just left, now you're seeing it again? And breathing mace for the first time is not a joke. So as you see this unfold and experience, you don't forget it. You know, like, how do you do a day-to-day process of trying to go to school, trying to do a job, trying to learn the system, when all the violence around you is happening inside the institution where you have no control over? You know, I can either say, hey, officer, I need help. He look at you like, fend for self. Okay, wrong concept there. Fend for self. Okay, where my friends at? What do I do? And you have to adapt. If you don't adapt in the institutions as far as day-to-day survival, you fall victim. When you fall victim, that means you don't grow at all. You just be a victim for 50 or 100 years. You just constantly go through a cycle. So it's a thing about how do you grasp, how do you focus, how do you communicate? And it is so critical that we communicate on a level like when me and Ben first met. It's like, tell me about your world. No, tell me about your world. How do you see me? You know, and I tell you how I see you. We used to laugh about that. And I'd say, investigative reporter, you look like an FBI guy because you always dig it. And that was our joke. And he would say, oh man, prison, you don't look, it doesn't fit you, you know. And we used to go back and forth over pros and cons about stereotypes. How do people see us? How do you look at a guy that was a 17-year-old kid that's now as a community activist? behind the wall fighting for prison change, trying to get a decent meal. No, we want this, we want that. Well, you can't get it. Okay, we protested. And that was that policy that we had to follow for change. I don't know how many people are familiar with the John Howard Association. John Howard Association have put a lot of good policy changes to help prisoners pursue education, pursue daily activity where you can be treated humanely. And that is so critical for growth. If you're going to abuse and torture and subject it to discipline relentlessly against an individual, how do you expect them to be positive or to form a benefit to society before he come home? And we have to take the time to say, how do you want to perceive? When people look at your case or hear your name or even say criminal justice or you in prison, you form a negative opinion already. Some people have a prejudgment because they figure that everybody should be in prison that's there. We often talking about what are prisons for? How is correction versus discipline or punitive actions? How do we equate the two when one say he's had enough or he's grown or he's changed? Each year you grow. Each month you experience something new. On a day-to-day basis you see change. But in our case, we have to sit up here and say, after 30 years, what have he done? Okay, what's the situation? What's the analysis? Does he want parole or does he deserve this or that? After 40 years, okay, we didn't been down this road before. Now what? What is the situation? After 45 or 50 years, you ask that same question. Okay, what more can we get from him? What is happening here? You have to understand that punitive and retribution over policy change, whereas you give me an opportunity to say rehabilitate, let me prove myself worthy of being paroled. You know, there was a case that came out, Montgomery versus Alabama. Montgomery versus Alabama shed a light on all youth across the United States. Anyone that was sentenced to natural life, death row, was given an opportunity to go back to court and get resentenced. I was one of those kids.
It effectively abolished life without parole for juveniles.
Yeah, for juveniles.
And it built on a Alabama v. Miller from 2 years earlier.
Yeah. And it gave youth an opportunity because you had cats that came in as 14 years old, were still in institutions at 70. And the Supreme Court says enough was enough. Give them a level or bar to meet to get them home. Give them a bar to meet if the case varies in a certain position, whereas they say, well, he deserved to be there, he was this, or he was that. Give them a bar, because no matter what you succeeded in, you got education, if you did this or you did that, you wasn't given the opportunity to say, I achieved this. Look at me now in a different light. I'm not 17 or 14 years old. For example, we talk about education. Dropped out of high school at 9th grade. Graduated from St. Joseph. Went to Holy Trinity, all-boys Catholic school. And I just happened to get caught up in here. My dream was a 1972 Olympics track and field. That was my goal. But I didn't make it. Education was not even thought about when I hit the institutions because it was all about survival. Survival of the fittest. How do I stay alive? A minor in an adult situation. How do I stay focused? How do I not get hurt? I took the time to, did a whole bunch of stupid stuff, but I grew. Each time I grew, I learned something. I took the time out to come off the circuit.
Tell them what the circuit is.
The circuit is, I was put on the circuit because of my activism. We fought for change. Prison reform.
But the circuit is like solitary confinement.
Yes, it's solitary confinement.
Yeah,
you know.
it's solitary confinement which every law says that people shouldn't be put in solitary confinement for longer than 48 hours.
48 hours.
How long were you in solitary?
I was in solitary confinement 7 years.
7 years.
7 years.
And not just in solitary, but it took a technique that was used in the military for prisoners of war that would move people almost weekly, sometimes daily or monthly.
Ex-Leffian program.
So that you could never be settled, so that you would go from one prison, and then just as you were being settled, they're going to take you to solitary in another prison. And Khalif did this for 7 years, where psychologically, not just being alone, but moved across the state to different prisons where he could never settle, or even mail could reach him.
I was getting Christmas cards in May. No, but you know, you look at that and you have to say, yeah, I've been through heck and high water, but no TV, no radio, no nothing. My best friend was my books. I took time to take my activism and cultivate it. I started reading Nelson Mandela. I started reading Nikki Giovanni, poetry. I started reading everything that come across my mind to find out how to fight. Even Gandhi. Gandhi and Martin Luther King I put on the same level because they practice nonviolence. And I used to always tell myself, how is this going to help me now? You know, I need to fight. But you learn, and there's power in being submissive. There's power in having faith. There's power in moving people to a degree of understanding you when you sit up and show your softer side, your compassion, and your willingness to say, hey, turn the other cheek, it's no big deal, you move on. But in my growth, I become keen and more aware of how to fight, what to fight for. All wars are not to be fought. All wars are not to be fought. My resources was limited. I had to take time to reach out, and it was limited. Communication was non-existent. We couldn't use the phone or nothing, you know, for 7 years, though, you know, even when we was ready to just.
And I'll just say, I mean, you talked about those, we just talked about those 2 Supreme Court rulings that found that young people shouldn't have life without parole sentences for the very reason that they're going to mature, they're going to grow up, their brains are going to change. And what you're describing also is that you're exactly like that.
Yeah.
That 25 years after you were sent to prison, when you're now 42, you're a different person than you were at 17 and 18. You've grown up.
I took time. My first degree comes from Lewis University, Catholic University. I got my first degree in general studies. My second degree comes from McMurray College in computer science. I have a business management. That's my proud certificate because I've always been running that business. I have over 21 certificates. I was a teacher's aide. I have been a peer educator. I teach about human wellness. I teach AIDS and HIV classes and hepatitis and et cetera to the general population. And had a mentorship class of 20 people on my account. We have to account for, we deal with 20 people I was the mentor. Our mentorship class got raving reviews from Illinois Department of Correction in Springfield. Our mentorship program was off the chain, but you know, like I said, we're limited because we are incarcerated. We can only do so much. My certification comes from Illinois State Public Health. I teach, and I teach it well, and I try to explain to people that HIV, blood, and et cetera, it's like, don't fall victim to, I think I know everything. Bloodborne pathogen is not a joke, you know. And we in a situation where we in close confinements of how do we deal with things. When the virus hit.
They were not even talking about COVID yet.
Yeah, we're not even talking about COVID yet. COVID hadn't even hit yet. And we're trying to save lives and preach the gospel of health. And like I said, we took time to really, I got all type of recommendations in the growth period. And it's like, we don't care. You get all the education you want, we don't care. It doesn't make a difference. Well, it don't make a difference to you, it'll make a difference to me. You know, my accomplishments, you can't take from me. The things I have achieved can't be overlooked. Dedication, discipline, and commitment is what got me through the door. I took time to look at my fellow inmates and say, we can't get involved in programs because they say you have too much time. It's the waste of money. It's the waste of taxpayers' money to educate you, to give you any opportunity. We are giving opportunity for anyone who have 5 years or 10 years or less. No problem. Protest. This is what we're going to do. You know, we created a program called Project Sound Off. Project Sound Off gave individuals with life sentence, we call them Buck Rogers outdate, 2072, 2099, opportunity to voice an opinion, to build from that, to have inserted them to just grow. And we had a particular program with the Project Sound Off called the Legacy Program. How do you want to be remembered? Sad to say that we die behind the wall. A lot of us don't make it. But how do you want to be remembered? You don't want to say my daddy was just a convict, or my uncle was this or that, or my brother he just in the penitentiary. No. The Legacy Program dealt on photos of family, your accomplishment, your certificates, you post them up, you build about hope, a little polio. In the word portfolio, you build your portfolio of pictures and family and yourself, and you start building a case history, and you would tell a story, and you would put them in book form. And when your people get it, your children, your loved one, they see another side of you rather than, oh, you just incarcerated. No, this is what I have accomplished in my lifetime. Remember me for this and not what they say I did or was accused of or what I was sentenced for.
That's beautiful.
Yeah.
I mean, I remember you first telling me about Project Sound Off and the work you did for others, but also for yourself about showing that, you know, life even behind the walls can have value, and to show that, it's really powerful.
Yeah.
The other thing you're describing is that we have geriatric prisons, that we allow people, we're a society that allows people to grow old and die in prison. And I'll say one of the things that people on both, you know, the right and the left, you know, so conservatives and liberals know is true, that there's an age in which most people commit crimes. And it's between about 17 and 24. And the vast majority of crimes happen during those times. That's just a fact. And so it's but in United States prisons, we have as many people who are 60 and older as we do in that age group. That's just a fact. Those are our numbers. And so it gets at like, well, what are we doing, and what's the point of prison? I mean that seriously. Like, what are we trying to accomplish in there? And that's actually why I got interested in looking at parole and going to parole hearings and then going to your parole hearings. Parole is not about convicting someone. Parole happens at the other end of a sentence, and it's supposed to determine when enough time is enough. When should this person get out? So Johnnie Khalif was given an indeterminate sentence, meaning it wasn't determined at sentencing. He was given 100 to 199 years. But in 10 years, after 10 years, he came up for a parole review.
Yeah.
And that parole review could say, okay, at 10 years, is it enough? And what are the things they're going to weigh? The original offense, you know, how serious was it? But also, you know, what have you done over this time? And it gets into this question of like, what actually we want a prison to do? We want some sense of like punishment, punitiveness. We want to feel like a crime is so serious that to like sort of restore the moral order that we live in, there has to be consequences. We do it for protection. We imagine that some people are dangerous and they need to be separated from society. We also do it for rehabilitation, supposedly, that people can change. And we have this fourth thing called deterrence, which we imagine that if we give a sentence of 100 and 199 years to somebody, it's going to make other people not commit crime because they'll understand the consequences. That when nobody's looking or whatever, they'll sort of feel that there's this danger. And you know, so you have a parole board, and it's like us. I mean, it's just a group of people sitting around trying to make these decisions. And the decisions are of the utmost consequences, somebody's fate. But also victims are there too, and they're feeling, you know, suffering after all these years. And the questions they have to get into are really like these ideas of like, if we're locking up 1 in 4 people in the world, man, we should have a pretty clear idea why we do it, right? And we don't. And that's not on the parole board necessarily, because they're dealing with the same society that we all are. But you see this being played out. It's kind of incredible to sit there, and as a storyteller, as a journalist, I went to a parole hearing and I was like, it was amazing for me. I mean, amazing in all the senses of like tragic, but also dramatic. And I'll say something that I think there's been an omission in what we've talked about sitting up here for the last, almost, 45 minutes, is that we haven't said what you went to prison for. And I will say that on my part, that's purposeful. That was intentional. Because, our instinct, or most of us on the outside, I know that on the inside you often don't talk about it either. But on the outside, we want to put somebody in a box. What did they do? And then when we hear it, we're like, okay, it was he deserves it, or he doesn't deserve it, or, oh, he was innocent, but. And I think we should probably check our own biases about that, because at a parole hearing, what you're really supposed to confront, first of all, is this person sitting in front of you in the present. Who is this person right now? What are they doing? Who are they now? And not what they did in 1970. You can weigh that as a factor, but if you hear that first, that's kind of all you hear. And to be really honest with you, when you go to parole hearings, that original crime, it still outweighs everything else. Because when I tell you a story of a crime, it's going to feel present tense. It is dramatic. It's going to feel like Macbeth. It's still killing the king. It doesn't matter when it happens. And that sense of our, how we feel of like a sense of justice, like everything kind of goes out the window about like what we're, to really weigh it in some other way. And, we could talk about it, but yeah, I mean, I also wanted to come to you, knowing you and like, and hear all the other things that you did in the present. Yeah. The human being that you are right now. When you're telling me about Project Sound Off, that's I have to weigh that. And I'll say that, looking through all your parole hearings, you moved a lot of people. Before your last hearing, Khalif had never gotten a single vote, ever. You have to get a majority of say, about 14 people. Yeah. And you had parole board members saying what I'm saying now, of like, wait, you have 21 certificates and these college degrees and you're mentoring people, and you have a letter from the warden saying you're an amazing person and you've transformed the entire prison, and that you're a volunteer and you're a COVID ambassador and you're doing all this work. God bless you. Thank you. One guy said to you, he joked, he said, we might need you more in prison than we need you out.
Yeah, that was amazing. That was amazing when he said that,
And I'll say one other thing before I want to ask you about getting out, that I've told you this before, but I visited prisons in Norway and Finland while we were working together and while I was working on this new book. And I was fortunate enough to go with a group of Americans who were either experts in criminal justice or had been incarcerated. And you go into a prison there, and one of the most amazing things to see is just the body language of, say, an incarcerated person and a guard. Because they're sitting there talking like the way we're talking right now. And there's no flexing, they are really having a conversation. And every guard is sort of given 3 or 4 incarcerated people as their responsibility to help them get out. It's their responsibility to make sure that the incarcerated person achieves. Yeah. And achievement there is not punishing you and keeping you here. They fail if you don't get out. It's like a school. If everyone gets an F, you're not a good teacher. And everything is built from day one to try to return people to society. Imagine that is not your experience.
No. Well, Department of Corrections in Illinois do not practice that. Their culture is to go with the political or the politic wave of the moment. For example, each year during election time, something may happen. It's all on the news. The politician that's a wise politician or one who can capture the wave would say, yes, we tough on crime and this is what just happened here. My opponent is not tough on crime because he won't side on this particular case. The case have nothing to do with politics. He's just catching the wave to get the vote from the people. Prime example, Governor Pritzker, challenger, Mr. Bailey
Yeah.
from the Republican Party. Don't know neither one. Fought like heck to get a clemency one time, but with Pat Quinn, it wasn't with Pritzker. The first thing Bailey says is, Pritzker is soft on crime. He paroled Johnnie Veal.
On the news.
On the news.
This face right here.
What do I have to do with this race? The thing is to capture your imagination, your perceptions of what you think criminals should look like or activity, etc. The thing is, we all have a bias. We all have a built-in radar that says, ooh, prisons, ooh, convicts, what is it, because we all have seen crime or been touched by crime in some way. So when someone says, the governor is soft on crime, this is what he did, he take a segment of our community that's going to vote on that vein. They vote on that vein of, hey, I need somebody who's tough on crime. I need somebody else. Pritzker's not my man. On the other hand, you reverse it and you say, wait a minute. Fact miner, you catch a guy like Ben. The governor don't grant parole.
The parole board does.
The parole board does.
Yeah.
But if you're not conscious enough to understand that the governor have nothing to do with the parole board, you are listening to the misinformation and you are voicing your vote upon your emotions of what was said. And that was so ironic that he would stoop that low or put that me in the position of saying, hey, this is what's going on here. Whereas I have been home 2 years, working hard, paying taxes, living life, doing what I'm supposed to do, trying to stay focused. And ball and chain is still there, but I have to continue this battle for another year to go through the process. Who's really free just because you made parole? No, you are not really free. I still have a ball and chain on my ankle for another year. Mind you now, 51 years. And I have to give them 3 more years on parole. When is enough enough? When is punitive damages, punitive damages? When is retribution, retributions? When is correctiveness is being corrected? I pay taxes, trying to buy a house, trying to live life, and most of all, I'm not trying to be bitter. Just for the record, you have to know that my journey has not been easy. I lose all my aunts and uncles. I lose my parents. I lose 4 brothers. I lost my kids, my oldest daughter, my son, doing this incarceration. But I am not bitter, because if I become out bitter, I miss my blessings. If I come out bitter, I don't grow. If I come out bitter, I'm not practicing what I preach about having faith, compassion, and understanding. If I come out bitter, I do something stupid, and that's against the grain of everything I have taught. As an educator, as a teacher, as someone who have mentored those who say, man, I can't do another day. What happened? Just lost my parents. Oh, let me tell you my story. Come on over here. Let me, give you a consultation. We support each other in our own ways. Because when I went through my hardships, my mentor, Mr. Ted Pearson, my wife, we got you. It is so important to have that support. It don't have to be family. Our support comes from the prison ministries. Our support comes from the church. Our support comes from community leaders, activists, and plain John community supporters. We have experienced it. Have never met Angela Davis in my life, Angela Davis sent me a beautiful picture in a card and said, hey, stay in the fight, keep going, don't lose faith. And it just tickled me on my birthday. But I learned, and Mr. Henderson, the book you gave me for the guy that said solitary,
Yeah.
I read that book before I came home and I saw what he went through.
Yeah. Wood fox.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I'm like, okay, understandable. Get it. But it gives you vision on life when you look in and you have to check your faith at the door. If it's weak, if it's being tested, if you're not committed, or if you're not strong in your fortitude, you would give up. Because the pressure, the pain, and the I would say heartbreaks, the disappointment, heartbreaks will crush you during the time of your growth in prison. The only thing that kept me strong was my famous proverb. Proverb 3, verse 5 and 6. Trust in the Lord with all your heart. Don't lean into your own desire. And he'll lead you through. And that's what kept me focused during my commitment in God. Bunch of Hail Marys and Our Fathers too. But it was there, you know. And that faith and that focus inspires you to reach out. So God said, I help you do everything you can for you, but you got to take that initial step. And I was every day. Hey Ben, and my other, my lawyer, Sarah, I got an idea. You know, hey, check this out. Go in the law library, check out this case. Look at this case and let you think about the premises. The synopsis says this and that. So we get it. Oh, and I have a paralegal certificate from the Illinois State of Illinois. I took time to educate myself and get that law insight because I was fighting for my life. Didn't know what a law book was. I went to school quick to learn about law. Once I learned about law, you couldn't tell me nothing. I learned how to tell a story and write a brief, but as I cultivated myself, I used to always ask me, how do you tell a story and get it across? And I'm looking at these cases in this law, they two different things. They talking about facts and forensics and statutes, and you talking about, okay, facts and figures and this and that. It's two different things. Okay, eyewitness said this and et cetera. So you have to take time to mold the information and form it the way you want to form it so you can present it and say, this is what my finished project looked like. Because many times you had investigated stuff and I'm like, wait a minute, man, put this with that and look at this and do this here. And we used to look at the facts. And the facts don't lie. Facts do not lie. Facts will tell the truth no matter how it come out. Like he said, when he investigated the story, investigated my life, he said, I'm going to tell it as I see it. And everything that we said was true to form. So I am blessed because I took the time for someone to listen. If no one had to listen, I would have still been in bondage. If no one had took the time to look under that rock that we talked about, I would have been in bondage. If I hadn't took the time to grow and learn how to reach out into the community and ask for help, I would have still been in bondage. If I hadn't took the time to understand what people actually see when they are committed to a cause or a project. I used to watch President Carter. Why is he building houses and he's the ex-president and he's supposed to, okay, habitats, let me find out, what is he doing? And I took time that he was committed to that project. He was committed to that rebuild and helping humanity. And I had to understand that people come from all walks of life, have the same vision and ideology that you have when it comes to criminal justice, injustice, community service, and volunteering. And that's what I have focus on.
Thank you. I'll say one other thing, and then maybe we'll take some questions, but thank you for that. I was talking about Finland and Norway and some of these other northern European countries. When people leave prison in those countries, the state, the government, inundates them with social services at the time they need them most. Because they've already done their time, and it benefits everyone to make sure that they succeed. Imagine that. At a time when somebody has fulfilled their sentence and has been leaving prison, the state is going to inundate them with all these social services, because this is the time when it's most critical for people. They're most vulnerable. The death rate in the first year of people leaving prison is like, I can't remember how many times, more than the national average, because people have overdose, they commit suicide. There's sort of all these health things that come into play. We do the exact opposite in this country. We make reacclimation incredibly difficult, and so you sitting here is also a testament to who you are, that you've gotten past some of these barriers.
Oh, yeah.
And so, and that we could talk more in the Q&A about some of the limitations on you, but all you've done is work, and you've got married, and as you said, pay taxes, and you're living your life. But we certainly have, as a country, we should be invested in people succeeding, because it actually, even financially, benefits us to not have such a high recidivism rate, and to think about what would make people be able to get jobs, be able to travel, be able to be full citizens again. Yeah.
Agree with you on that.
Yeah. Some questions? Should we pass around a mic? Is that?
Hi, I have a question about your faith, Johnny. Is this on?
Khalif.
It is. I'm almost speechless listening to you. You're a remarkable person. And I was very curious about your faith that you relied on. And you said it was based on a proverb. It must have been more than that. Was it your youth? Because you said you went to Catholic school.
Yeah, it's a variety of things that maintains you. You have faith. Faith gets you through. Trust me, faith gets you through what nothing else do in prayer. That is the foundation. But there are other variables, that support mechanism that keep you standing. Because if you have nothing to do or look at four walls all day, you mentally won't survive. You have all type of issues. In my case, superb athlete, played baseball, football, and we did all this behind the wall. I played semi-pro behind the wall, got a chance to see Walter Payton in the refrigerator when they come down to the institutions. I played in, pardon my expression, 1 in a million. It's a movie, 1 in a million, the Ron LaFleur story. With LeVar Burton, Wanda Page, and a few others. I got a chance to play in that movie. I was pitching. But it gives you a perspective that you are still alive. You can interact with the community. You can interact with society when you are presented with such. But again, something to do. Something to do means going to school, participating in sports, having a love of family, being involved. In my case, I was involved with the change. I fought for policy change. I got with John Howard Association. We got to doing things, But when it's all said and done, when I'm in my cell watching television, my hands behind my head, I pray. And it is so relaxing and it's so focused, because when you get through with that chapter in your life, you know that regardless of what happened in life, God's got you. I may lose a lot of friends, lose a lot of loved ones, but God got me. He got his own plan for me. My chapter in life have yet to be written, because God ain't through with me yet.
Khalif and Ben, thank you so much for your comments and your testimony here. Really appreciate it. Ben, you addressed one of my questions, which was about the challenges for reintegration and how different it is in other parts of the world, especially Europe, compared to the States. I wanted to understand more about the educational opportunities that you took advantage of in prison and your perspective, and yours as well, Ben, about how accessible they are and well organized. It strikes me that there's many prison education efforts that are out there, but they're not consistent and they're not necessarily presented to folks that are in the carceral system to take advantage of them and to understand what their path might be.
Early on in incarceration in the 70s and early part of the 80s, educational programs, vocational classes, they was available to us. Matter of fact, institution I first started off was in Stateville. Joliet Junior College and Rice College, all of them was basically inside the institution with programs in school. Period of time goes on, in the late part of the 80s, they took the Pell Grants out of the institutions.
It was actually part of the 1995 crime bill that
Yeah,
you
the
said.
crime bill took all educational programs out of the institutions.
So that it funded
Yeah.
higher learning. So
Yeah.
so tertiary education,
Yeah.
it was paid for by these grants, and suddenly we decided as a country, this was Democrats as well as Republicans, that people in prison were undeserving of this.
Undeserved, yeah.
And so that we're gonna take away this funding, and so they're no longer these programs.
Yeah.
This is 1994 that
Yeah.
they're mostly taken away.
Yeah, so,
Actually, Biden is the
Yeah.
is the author of that bill.
Yeah,
It-
yeah, so
it's a fact. I mean, it's true.
cut all education opportunities. But some colleges, I don't know how they got around the work. I don't think they took a.
Well, like I teach in the university,
Yeah.
so they're not institutionalists. We're volunteer.
Yeah, they start giving us programs on the sly, you know, and then they shut that down for a period of time. Then they said, okay, you can take a correspondence course. So for about 10 years, everybody was taking correspondence courses that could afford it. A lot of us couldn't afford to take a correspondence course. You know, we was trying to do this and trying to do that, and heck with it.
And a correspondence course, which I thought are terrible, meaning like
Yeah.
I send you a lesson and you send me back the homework assignment
Yeah,
in the mail. Like this is not. It's a really inferior way to learn.
yeah. And if the assignment is late, you get a failing grade. If the assignment is late, if it don't come through, and it's not guaranteed that we will get the assignment in a timely manner because of the institution policies, you know. So it was a period of time where everybody was just stuck on stupid. And you get your education where you can. You know, books was coming in from family and friends, but you couldn't get accredited for it. And then after a period of time, 2012, 2011, somewhere in there, institutions start allowing colleges to reintegrate on some type of funding or something. But Pell Grants, we still can't get Pell Grants.
And you said something else earlier, Khalif, which is true in the limited resources of education, that it's the people who are prioritized are those who they think will go home sooner. You know, like 90% of the people in prison are coming home. So we certainly want people to be rehabilitated in prison. But then it means that long-timers are denied this limited resource, which is learning, which is sometimes just for you know, enriching your life.
Yeah.
I mean, like we learn stuff. You're here today because this is enriching. Your life is more meaningful to have these conversations. If you're in prison, your life is more meaningful if you take a writing class, if you take a history class, if you take a religion class.
Khalil, I'm Catholic too, by the way. We're in a minority here, but I would be interested to hear about your journey to forgiveness. Are you there yet? And how'd you get there?
Forgiveness, I had to make, yeah, am I there yet?
I don't know. I actually don't know the answer.
No, that is an excellent question. I was there, 1992, because if I hadn't, that's when I lost my mom. I lost my mom in 91. I grieved for a whole year trying to get my focus. But in 92, you had to make a change to where you have to buckle in and do this time. I cannot let time do me. If I sit here and hold a bitter pill and say, these people did this and they did that and my mama died because of this and blah, 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 I would have been stuck. I would have been stagnated. When I go to confessions every week or so, I wish I can go every week, but every week or so, when I go to confession, me and the priest had that one-on-one after we could go through the confessions. And we talk about compassion. We talk about forgiveness. And I used to always ask myself, how do you forgive when you sit up and did 40 or 50 years for something that you didn't do? And in the process of doing this time, you lose everything. Everything that's close to you has gone. I try not to even think about being bitter. Like I said, I miss my blessings. If I don't forgive, I carry my baggage into my personal life. And if I bring it into my personal life, there's no happiness for us, period. One thing I have learned, and I learned that from a friend with that phrase, one thing I have learned. One thing I have learned about forgiveness, there's a time and place to do any and all of that. Only you can pinpoint the time where you just surrender yourself to God and just put it in his hands. You can talk that talk, yeah, okay, I forgive you. No, you have to really feel it, because if you don't feel it, you fall victim to a reactionary movement or reactionary event in your life that sets you back. So when we say, when am I there yet, or when did I get there? I got there in 92 because I had to make that choice. I see my self-worth. My self-worth say I am better than this. My self-worth say I am better than the label you tried to put on me. My self-worth tells me that I have value and I refuse to throw it away. So forgiveness was at the top of the order once I got through grieving.
I'd also say thank you for that. That's powerful. And usually that question is directed towards victims of crimes and their families. You know, how did you come to forgiveness or not? And so much of our country's policy on criminal justice is actually defined by that, by victims of crimes and sort of us, you know, holding up their pain and, you know, their feeling of brokenness and their fear and sort of setting policy that way. And I'll say from going to parole board hearings, victims and their families get to speak. And so in Khalif's case, you know, 50 years and 40 years of parole hearings, a family showed up every several years, every parole hearing. And in most cases, there is no forgiveness. And it really speaks to me to a broken criminal justice system. That after 30 years, 40 years, 50 years, that if you still feel nothing, no relief, no sense that society has, you know, something has been repaid or something for that obviously eternal punishment is not the answer for you. It's never going to give it to you. It has to come from somewhere else. And we could talk about faith. I will say within the criminal justice system, there's also a movement to have a kind of a restorative justice act where there's some kind of dialogue and where it's been sort of, as it's been assessed, it's been proven to be more effective in both victims and people who are convicted of crimes to try to work forward to a kind of healing. But yeah, that question often comes the other way.
Yeah.
Either one, whatever. I don't have the mic. We have one here and one here.
I just had an observation. Is it Kalia also
Khalif.
a victim? Kalia?
Well, this part of our society is who we define as a victim. You know, when George Floyd was murdered by that police officer, he was called the assailant. And, you know, one of the things that happened with the victim rights movement, which is important, that victims of crimes are seen and they have a voice. But really what we're talking about when we start to talk about victims of crimes we're usually thinking about white communities that are much less often victimized by crime. And most of our policy is based on that. That's just the truth. I mean, if you think of all these laws that have passed, of like, Marcy's Law or the Amber Alert, every one of those is a white crime victim, every single one. And that set a lot of our policy. And so what does it mean to be a victim? I mean, here was a teenager who was, in an area with a lot of crime. His throat was slit at one point as a 16-year-old. His sister, I'm sorry to say, was raped. This is victimhood, and we have this saying in criminal justice circles: "Hurt people hurt people," and so. If you go into prison, some incredibly high percentage of people who were there who have committed crimes have also been victims of crimes.
True.
I have two separate questions. First, I wonder if you might talk to us about your parents. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Here we go. Two separate questions. First, I wonder if you might share something about your parents when you talk about your faith and your self-confidence and your lack of bitterness. If some of this was instilled by your parents or other family members. And second, as individuals, what do a question for both of you, advise us to, how can we take action? What can we do? How can we use our voices? Beyond, as you say, conversations and education like this for the intrinsic value of education, but in making our lives more fulfilling or meaningful. But what can we do in terms of taking action as an individual to make a difference? Thank you.
You want to tackle that? Let's see. When we're talking about taking action, I'll come back to the parents in a minute. We'll take the strongest one for you. When we're talking about taking action.
I think you're not loud all of a sudden. Go ahead, speak.
No, that's fine. When we're talking about taking action, time is so valuable because you have to give that time up to fight this fight.
Our precious resource.
Yeah, there you go, time. That's your precious resource is your time. Focus on how effective you can be in what area. Some people work better in policy change. For example, you say community activism with the John Howard Association, or community activism with the church. The church may have a thing where they help returnees coming back from the institution to reacclimate it back into society. We call it a reentry program. You may have reentry programs already set up in your community that you can volunteer for. If you are a fighter and you feel like reentry is one thing, but I really want to get into the fight and make changes, the power of the vote. The power of the vote. If people not have a clear conscience and a moral concept about life and humanity and how to deal with fairness in the criminal justice system, you don't vote for that judge. You don't vote for that state's attorney. You don't vote for this individual that's trying to run for governor. Because when they're in office, they make the policy change. They sign the law. That's the high echelon. But grassroots, you can be very effective also because you carry the power of the voice. People will listen when you sit up and say, we're going to Springfield to lobby. We're going to lobby on this House bill. What House bill is it? 337. Okay, what's on 337? Or it's about funding this and we're going to get this done and et cetera. Or another bill may be up about helping those who are incarcerated trying to get education. Those who are incarcerated trying to get housing upon release. You have to pick your fight, and you understand that your time is your most precious commodity. How much time can you give? And you have to be effective in what you choose. You choose your strength. What is your strength? Only you know your strength, how you want to use your strength. Your strength may be, I got this laptop and I know what to do with it. And that's great. Some people are like, oh, I can't deal with this laptop. But let me get on the phones. I can man these phone calls. We're going to do this. I need you to rally. We're doing this. Organizing is so critical. If you're a great organizer and a people person, put your package together, because there's power in your voice. There's power in your group that you put together if you like-minded. It is so critical that you have like-minded people around you that feel like you feel and fighting for the same cause that you're fighting for. You talk about family and faith and etc. My mom, my mom was a trooper. Trust me when I tell you that. Every day, get your butt in church. Hey, get what school activity, get over there, you know. But she kept us grounded. Moms kept us grounded. She kept us focused on dreams. What do you want to be when you grow up? How you going to get there? Don't lose your focus. Don't lose your focus. Don't lose your focus. Keep your determination. And so you instill those little small things that grows and mountains into other things where you start getting your ideology. We didn't have a concept of ideology about anything until moms put it in your head, you know. You can do this, baby. Keep doing this here. I'm going to take you to school here and blah, blah, blah. You in the gymnastics this week? Okay. And you start having that trust and that feeling of saying moms can teach you everything. You can do everything. So every Sunday when she dragging you out to church, you know that's the right place to be. You know? But my mom's had everybody. I'm talking about everybody. She come from a strong Baptist family with my grandmama and whatnot. But when she moved to Chicago, all of us went to parochial school. We all went to St. Joseph, everybody. I'm talking about all of us. My first communion, I remember my first communion, you know, baptism, everything. She laughed at it now, my wife, because the cards, my baptism, it's all beat up. You can tell it's like a 1942 trinket or something. But it gives you memories to think about how they try to cultivate you to have that spiritual background, that spiritual outreach when nothing else is there, you know. Baby, everything's gonna be all right, you know. You still got your rosary? You know, yeah, go pray through Hail Marys, it's gonna be all right, you know. And we laugh about it now, but when you look back on it, that's the greatest teachings that was ever given to us. When mom sits you down and get you ready for church and get you ready to understand what God is. Because the first thing we say is, who's God? We don't see him. He's there, he's in the spirit, you know. And how many times as kids we say, I don't believe that, I can't see it. But as you get older, you begin to see the concept, you know. Especially when you sit up to make the sign of the cross. And you have to sit up here and hold that faith, you know, and you go through the Mass and you see the traditions, the acclamation of the I'm talking about the whole proceedings, and you take it in. And that starts your faith, that starts your building blocks of life. So everything that you learn and she reinforces it, you go into the community and it's even stronger. You know. Oh, one last thing. Sister Mary Bennett. Sister Mary Bennett was the head principal at school. I learned so much from that now. I learned, and my knuckles too. I learned so much from her. You know, but that was the best part of life. And that's what I want to leave you with. That was the best part of life.
Ben, is there anything you want to add to that before we wrap this up?
About my parents? No, I'm just kidding. I'll say about what you can do. So one of the things we didn't say is that Khalif was eligible for parole, but no one in prison convicted after 1978 is eligible for parole. There is no parole in our state. Parole, this idea of a second chance, is kind of the foundation to any religion, right? That people can change and they have a second chance. It feels like it's our values as a country. Parole does not exist. There's no chance for a second chance. So there is a bill coming up in the state legislature about reinstating parole, that people in prison should have at least a chance to present themselves and say, look at me now, I'm different, and it's safe to send me back to society. Give me at least that chance. If you have a 40-year sentence now, you're serving a 40-year sentence. There is no chance. That is one thing that's really crystal clear and do. I will say for me, parole in itself is not the goal. The thing I said before about us having, we have 1.2 million people in prison now, and we used to have under 200,000. We are living in an aberration. We have normalized something that is completely abnormal. We are the frog in the boiling water, and the water has been boiling for 50 years. And so I'm sounding the alarm. I'm saying this tough on crime stuff, the things that you say, like we need to do more of this, we can't do more. We have been doing this for 50 years now. It doesn't work. It destroys our society. And that's another thing. Like this thing that we have normalized, you have to spread the word that it's not normal. That we are doing something that we also never did as a country prior to 2 generations ago.
Ben, Khalif, thank you both very, very much. I think we all agree that we could talk all night with the two of these incredible gentlemen. In the interest of both of them having far distances to travel to get home, unfortunately, I think we have to say our goodbyes, but I want to thank you both for sharing your experiences, your story. What strikes me is Khalif is one person in a system of, per Ben's statistics, over 1 million, and it's hard to imagine how many people are going through the journey that you yourself have traveled. Thank you for being here. If you are interested, we do have books for sale, as I mentioned before, at the back table. Also, Ben's book, Correction, is coming out November 7th. It'll be really interesting after having had the opportunity to speak with both Ben and Khalif to do a deeper dive into that book. We do hope that you'll return to talk to us after that book is released. We're excited for that. Congratulations. And I would like to ask Squire Prince, who is our youth director here at Kenilworth Union Church, if he will come up and close us in a prayer. Thank you all for coming. One last thought, if you were moved or stirred by this presentation tonight, it has been recorded. So if you have friends or family that would be interested in hearing what Ben and Khalif had to share, it will be available on the kuc.org website as well as on YouTube. So thank you all for being here. To anybody who would like to have it, yes, absolutely. Do you know when they're going to upload it? On the Kenilworth Union website. Okay. Thank you both very much. Safe journeys.
Thank you. Thank you.
Let us pray. Dear God, we pray that in this moment we are transformed by your grace, Lord God. Let us not leave this place the same way that we came from hearing this testimony, Lord God, from hearing the truth of the system. May we, by your love, move and work and be a presence. Guide our steps. Lead our path. Speak through us, Lord God. Make us agents of change by your loving grace. In the name of Jesus Christ, our beloved, give us safe traveling and mercy as we leave this place. Amen.